Okay, with me today, folks, is Michael Anthony Santo. And Michael is a lawyer in New York State. He's licensed to practice there in New York State, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. And he's been a real fighter for us on a number of fronts. And I'm going to talk to him today about his work in the Italian American community in saving Columbus Day. And most notably, he worked to get an apology for the mass lynching in New Orleans in 1891. He got an apology from the mayor there, Mayor LaToya Cantrell. So I'm happy to speak with Michael today, Michael Anthony Santo. Hey, Michael.
How are you? Good to see you.
How are you doing?
Excellent. Beautiful day.
Well, that's great. I like the background. I like the barber shop background you got there.
I have a barber chair off to my left.
Oh, really? Wow.
I restored it, years ago, many years ago.
Was your father a barber?
No, I used to work next to a barber shop, and the barber and I got friendly. I used to go there as a kid. My grandfather would bring me there. Every 2 weeks, I'd get a haircut. So I always loved the barber chair. So one day, the fella said to me, I have some barber chairs down in the basement. If you can take it out, it's yours. So I did. And we went on from there.
Well, you got your hair all together, that's for sure. Good for you.
Yeah, I'm lucky that way. It turned gray. But the grayness gave me credibility, people tell me.
Yeah, distinguishing remark, right. So how long can you talk to me today? What's your schedule?
I'm open. I'm open the rest of the day.
Oh, wow,
what if you want to? I could talk for hours.
Whoa, all right, let's do it.
But these are interesting subjects, Truby, and they're all over the map. And I have a passion for this. I've given other lectures on certain points about Italian American history here, and people are finally realizing what we went through, and so I started doing some deep dives for some organizations. I belonged to a number of different organizations over the years, giving counsel to them. From time to time, I withdrew myself from the boards because of so much time I had to dedicate to it. But I've always remained active, even as a young lawyer back in the mid '80s. That's when I started getting involved with Italian American affairs, especially with bias and bigotry. And I noticed it hasn't gone away. So it's sad.
Yeah. Well, we're recording as we speak, so I guess let's just keep on talking and stuff. What your special counsel? Who are you serving as special counsel nowadays in the Italian American community?
Well, I'm kind of a freelancer. That's the best way I can put it. I was counsel with the Commission for Social Justice of the Order of Sons and Daughters of Italy in America for about 15 years, as well as its executive board and foundation. But the Commission for Social Justice was always special for me because they dealt with trying to right wrongs. And as you know, my practice is I sue people on behalf of injured parties. So I'm always there for the little guy to get them compensated and whole. So growing up in a blue-collar community with a blue-collar background, my dad drove a tractor trailer, I always thought that the little guy needed a break.
Yeah,
so when I was asked to join certain people who I admired, and later on became a mentor of mine, I said yes. So at that point, the Commission for Social Justice in New York State was kind of growing, and it emulated itself after the ADL, Anti-Defamation League,
right?
Because they had their act together. They still do, and they have problems now. But at that point in time, they were really, really well funded, well organized. So we adopted a lot of their protocols and guidelines moving forward to deal with anti-Italian bigotry and bias, most of which at that time was coming out of Hollywood, and it still is. It doesn't stop. If you name it, the top 5 Italian movies are all about gangsters.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah.
It has a certain sex appeal, even to Italian Americans, unfortunately. But it is what it is. We just try to create a balance. We determined that fighting the issue of Italian mobsters in American history wasn't the way to go. It happened. It's true.
Yeah.
It's as true as rain. But we said, there's more to us than that mob. It's such a small minutia of who we are. Why don't you concentrate on the scientists and the politicians and the people who are creative? What
Yeah.
about doing a special about Leonardo da Vinci or
Oh,
Michelangelo?
yeah, sure.
And by the way, we were successful to a pretty good degree in
Yeah.
getting that balance, specifically with HBO in the early days
Yeah.
when they were running this abhorrent show called Jersey Shore,
Oh, yeah, right.
which was just dripping wet of all types of Italian nonsense and
Stereotype.
stereotypes.
Yeah, sure. Mm.
But as it goes, Truby, if you don't fight the good fight, nothing's going to happen.
Well, that's very true. And you're very instrumental. I think probably your biggest success so far. Would you agree with that? With just getting Mayor LaToya Cantrell to issue an apology in New Orleans in 2019 for the
Yeah,
mass lynching of
yeah.
11
So
Italians in 1891. So that was a big thing for you that you got done for us.
two interesting points about that, and
Yeah.
I'll admit to the world that before that actually came up as a committee item in the Commission for Social Justice meeting here in New York, I didn't know what the hell it was. I had no idea, no clue. And as soon as it was brought up, I was kind of embarrassed, and I started doing some research into it. And it was brought up in the sense that, well, this was never addressed.
Yeah.
120 some odd years earlier, this happened. It was never addressed. And so I volunteered to take it on. But I said, under one condition, I don't want a committee. And they said, why not a committee? Everything was a committee, especially with organizations. I said, first of all, it bogs things down. And I said, who are we to march into New Orleans and ask for an apology about what happened there over 120 years earlier? And they said, well, how are you going to handle it? I said, leave it to me. I just don't know. I have no idea. And the other point I want to make, afterwards it happened, as ignorant as I was before, I remained still somewhat ignorant. Again, I admit that. And I remained ignorant about the impact that apology had with respect to Italian-American affairs, with respect to the Italian-Americans themselves in terms of not knowing about this, and the impact that it had with our organizations moving forward. Up until that point, I think it's fair to say, and you'll agree, that all of these wonderful Italian-American organizations throughout the country, local, state, national, they were splintered. They talked with each other, they socialized, but in terms of getting together to do something on a coalition, it just didn't happen.
Mm.
I'll take it back. It happened once, and I was involved with that when we dealt with HBO, but it didn't happen on a continual basis, unfortunately. So we lost our stride. Each individual organization had that much power, not realizing that as a coalition, they had so much more. And that event down in New Orleans woke people up. I guess the term is, it's not a legal term, it pissed people off, Truby.
Right, yeah, sure. Yeah.
People realized that, wait a second, I didn't know that we were victimized like that. I didn't realize that we were treated like that when we immigrated to this country. And it got people to think that, well, if this happened to us and we never made a big stink about it, and we're getting treated this way about the Columbus issues, which is now the confluence between the apology down in New Orleans in 2019 and now the cancel culture crowd dealing with Columbus Day and Columbus statues. That together really made people realize we have to change our attitude and approach to dealing with Italian-American affairs. And we did with the advent of a couple of organizations, in particular, Copa Mayo,
Yeah.
Which is an acronym. If I get this wrong, I apologize. But I believe it deals with the major Italian-American presidents throughout the country.
Conference of Presidents of Major Italian-American Organizations. That's what it is.
Now, I should know that.
It's a mouthful, yeah.
I got a bad mark. But truly, when they started to meet, especially after the 2019 event, they started to get some gravity and focus and momentum from Italian Americans. And I'm talking about money, I'm talking about recognition, and I'm talking about chatter. People were getting angry and starting to realize we've got to get together and do something. So it woke up that little giant in us, the majority, the silent majority crowd, and I guess we needed that kick. So it was a fortunate thing in a way.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Where do you think we are right now with regards to this? With all the events that are happening, are we moving forward? Do you think, or we're still playing
Well,
serious defense?
we've got a long way to go. I mean, the good news about Italian American immigrants to this country, and my grandparents specifically, was that they embraced America. They flew
Yeah.
the American flag. They learned the pledge. Not that they left everything behind in Italy, but they wanted to embrace this culture of this country because it was a fortune for them. This was truly a way for them to grow and to bring their family up in a different area and say goodbye to those terrible times in Italy that was really going through a lot of frustrating moments. And so when we became successful and we finally had Anton Scalia on the Supreme Court bench, and we had a governor like Mario Cuomo and Lee Iacocca heading up as the CEO of a major corporation, and et cetera, we started to become comfortable. And unfortunately, we became complacent. And through our complacency, we became complicit in the problem. We kind of avoided it and said, okay, you want to kick us down. You want to concentrate on those movies. You want to call us names. And now you want to take away Columbus statues. And you want to do away with Columbus Day. That's okay. It wasn't. So we finally realized that our complacency had to be readdressed. And so to answer your question firmly, that pendulum, which started to swing so much in the other way, that cancer culture pendulum, which is abhorrent in my view, I think stopped and is starting to eke back and swing back, but we have to keep up the pressure. And the organizations and some of the major players, by the way, and I have a list, I don't forget anyone. Some of the major players here are so terrific in getting things done. Because if it weren't for them, we wouldn't have a future to move forward.
Sure.
So, I mean, the people I'm talking about, as you know, are Basil Russo, Mayo, Angelo Vivolo, who has about 3 different hats.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Andre Domino out of New Jersey,
sure,
One Voice Coalition.
Oh, yeah.
Bob Ferrito with CSJ,
Yeah.
Social Justice at the national level.
Mm-hmm.
John Frauder at the New York level, and then you have Eileen Siri, who is that lone woman and the founder and chair of the National Italian American Organization of Women, and they're all terrific people. And the good news is that they not only talk, they really mingle and trade conversations and have conferences, and we're not done yet. So yeah. We're starting to swing back, Joby, and I'm happy about that. I'm happy to be a part of it.
Well, you were involved with the I read your letter that you wrote to the Mount Vernon City Council because they wanted to switch out Columbus Day for Indigenous Peoples Day. So how did that go? How did that turn out for y'all? Did that?
I think the hearing is next Wednesday.
Oh, there's not a hearing today. Okay.
Yeah, but it's a farce. To be frank with you, and I've testified at certain hearings around the country, thankfully through Zoom, some in person, and not all of them have been farces, by the way. Some have actually listened. We've actually had some people call. People have actually read that letter, which is more of a tome than a letter.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But if I didn't do a deep dive and explain the history about Columbus Day and juxtapose Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day and spell out the respect that we have for the history of the American Indians here, we're not there to step on them. We're not there to fight them. And it's awful that politicians seem to be pitting Italian Americans with the indigenous people. I don't know why. That's silly.
It's crazy. It's just it's sad too because I've never met an Italian American that didn't have serious sympathies for indigenous people. I mean, it's just sad how we've become adversaries. I've never. It's for me. It's very sad, very troubling.
I mean, as a culture, I'll say this: I am blessed to be Italian. I'm so happy to be Italian.
Right, of course.
In the same token, my friends of other ilks, I respect and I adore the fact that they likewise feel that way.
Yes.
about their culture and their background because it's beautiful. But then you move forward, and this is the philosophical point that I'll make. We're all the same.
Yeah. Right.
Put us under a microscope
Right.
and take away the different facial features that we developed over years and years, as anthropologists will explain. We're the same exact people underneath.
Yeah.
Same. We all came from the same uh, background when
Right.
you go back thousands of years, tens of thousands
Right.
of years. So what's the issue? Right?
Yeah.
Is it a problem being proud of a guy named Columbus or someone else? I mean, leave us alone. Let us have some fun. Let us respect our background, our people, our culture. And that's the problem. And the other problem is that a lot of, I don't want to put everything in one bucket and say, all the liberals are liberals. It's people who don't understand, who don't know the history, who don't go through the trouble of learning and doing it, not necessarily a deep dive, but asking the questions. Why are you celebrating Columbus? And I said, it's more about Columbus. It's more than just Columbus, the person, by the way.
Yeah. Right.
He's an idol for sure. There's no question about it. Yeah. But he's more or less a symbol of our culture and our background. He's a symbol. Yeah. And when you start saying, oh, he's also a symbol of racism, of colonialism, of being a rapist and a murderer, I said, wait a second. To some extent, you're now reinventing history, and now that's doing a deep dive into some other issues dealing with our educational system, starting at about the 80s, right?
Right.
And how our children, now adults from that point, have become radicalized and learned, I think, the wrong things. And Howard Zinn is one of those favorite people.
Sure, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Marxist philosophy about America.
How did it get this bad? Let me ask you, how did it get this bad? I mean, we're all here. The education system is, we're all observing it. And how did it get this radicalized? I mean, that fast, that intense.
Well, it really wasn't fast. It started gradually in the universities and went down into the high schools. Don't forget, the people who learned this in the universities went on to teach. They went on to become successful people in their own fields, but they kept a certain mentality. And again, I'm using broad terms, so forgive me. Not everyone feels this way.
Right.
But a lot of that carried on through their adult life, and they kept that idea that Columbus was this way or that way, or that certain things are viewed in a certain prism.
Right.
And unfortunately, they kept that attitude, and they didn't question it. And again, we became complicit in that by not saying, you got to learn about this. We tried through the Commission for Social Justice. We tried to express positive imaging, but it was difficult. We didn't have the funding. We didn't have the audience. We didn't have the backing. Even Italian Americans themselves weren't that interested in taking that leap. And they continued to go watch these mob movies and started to express mob features in their conversations and think it was cool to be related to mob figures, even if it was through Hollywood. And so, it was a gradual thing, but it started to overwhelm us. That gradual thing makes things collapse. And what collapsed was now the advent of the movement after the death of Floyd.
Yeah, George Floyd, right.
You know something? And that's a whole different story. And I bring it up because that death expressed another thing that we had to address. We had to look inwards, to be about ourselves and how we treated our fellow citizens. And so, we had to reinvent ourselves and think about how we feel and how we treat each other. And at the same time, that became swept up in other things. And now, Columbus, you're on that side of the aisle. And you too, George Washington. And Abe Lincoln, we all thought you were so great. But no. We find things wrong with you as well. But where does this stop? Where does it stop? I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, they probably wanted to take out Thanksgiving, right? But they thought, well, Thanksgiving is too popular with the American people. So I think it's just been this movement, very savvy on their part, to target Columbus Day. They can target Columbus Day, they can vilify Columbus, And by vilifying Columbus, you start on the process of vilifying just America itself, the founding of America, the European connection of America, and that's kind of what it is. So Italian Americans really are on the front line of this, and what the future of the country is going to be, and how people look at the country.
Oh, you're on the right track. I think you're 100% correct. There's so many elements that goes into it. That's why it's fascinating to me. It's a sociological mystery.
Yeah.
A lot of it's psychological too. You can cross any number of different fields to examine this. And the strange thing is that, again, when we've been pitted against the indigenous peoples, don't forget, I mean, reading through that letter, and I'll bring it out now in our conversation, is that Wounded Knee happened only months before the lynching in New Orleans in March of 1891. And those two events happened during a time when President Harrison was trying to become elected president again. He was a president, and someone succeeded him. I forget who it was. Now he's running again, and everyone would have forgotten about what happened with the lynchings, except for one thing, in my view, or the strongest thing, and that was the Italian government. They were really, really angry to the point where they withdrew their ambassador to the United States, angry to the point where they threatened, without any substance, I believe, war with America. And you say, oh, Italy and the United States, but think again, in 1891, Italy had a stronger army and force than America. And that was true. So they were strong in their view. And they forced the government to actually come up with reparations for the victims of those families, and they were paid out. I forgot the number. Some say it was $25,000 a family, which is a lot of money back then.
Yeah, it's big.
That was paid by the United States government. But yeah, the attitude of the Italian government forced a grand jury review of what happened in the courts. That was a farce as well. It was all covered up. And they did a great job. Someone said it was the best cover-up in the history of America. But now we have others that I think are vying for that position.
Right. Well, you've been involved also after that, after the lynching of the 11 Italians, the immigrants in New Orleans, and this is something you've been involved with also, is, the newspapers, the major newspapers then and now, cheered on the vigilante lynching, and you've been involved in trying to get the New York Times and some other newspapers apologize for this kind of coverage.
If you thought my letter to the city was long, my letter to the New York Times of May 1 of 2018 went on for about 75 pages. The main portion of the letter was. Did you read that at all, Truby?
I read it. I did read it. I didn't read all 75 pages, but I read a lot of it.
Well, most of the pages are attachments. They have to be attachments because we had about a dozen or so endorsements from different Italian American organizations. I had the dedication made by President Harrison about Columbus Day, and a lot of other things which were important, including the list of those people who were lynched. And again, let me stop for a moment. People think that everyone was lynched by hanging. Only 2 were actually hanged. The others were either shot or clubbed over the head.
Really?
But the term is a term of art, if you want to call it that, historically, about how people are who die en masse. And so when 2 people are actually lynched by rope, one on a lamppost, one on a tree, the other 9 fall into the same category. So they call it the worst mass lynching in American history. I don't think that's true. I think there was another one involving American Indians that was much, much higher, over 50, if not more than that. I forget where that was. But my point is that these 2 events took place so close together. And what was the American reaction going to be? Well, President Harrison, according to most historians, dedicated that day, Columbus Day, not so much for Italians, but for Americans. So why did he choose him? And I haven't found anything yet about a list that he may have had in front of him, but I believe he asked certain people in his administration to come up with a list. give me some ideas about what day that should be. And don't forget, 1892 or 4 was the Columbus exhibition in Chicago. Probably the best and most glorious World's Fair ever to take place. And so you have all those factors. The other factor, I believe, was that even though Catholics in America didn't have much political clout, they were growing in number.
Right.
And the wave of immigrants coming in, especially from Ireland and Italy, were growing. And so it was a good political move to choose a Catholic.
Yeah.
And so that was it. Columbus Day wasn't meant to be an annual event. It was meant as a one day of celebration. But it caught on, and it caught on big, and it became, I guess, through an act of Congress, decades later, it became an official federal holiday. The problem now that we're facing is that something called home rule, it's a legal term, it's a legal philosophy, that local villages, towns, states, they have a right to do what they want with respect to the operating of their local government. So the city of Mount Vernon here in New York, which is a city in Westchester, one county just north of the Bronx, has a right, absolute right, to do whatever they want about Columbus Day. There's no question about that. But let's face it, it's political in nature. And so even though a city like Mount Vernon was, or Newark, New Jersey, or Chicago or New York, was once the home of so many Italians. When those Italians became successful, they moved to the suburbs, bought homes, and had barbecues in their backyards. And so when I speak with people who organize this issue against Mount Vernon changing the name, I said, what happens to all the Italians in Mount Vernon? So they moved out. I said, well, the problem is that when you move out, you lose that political clout. How do you think you can go back and now force the politicians to listen to you?
Right.
And that's part of the problem. And so there are ways of doing it. You saw that in my letter. One, show some respect.
Yeah, right.
If you want to embrace the ideas of diversity and inclusion, then why would you pit us against indigenous peoples? There are already 2 recognized days, national days, for Indigenous Peoples Day. And so why would you pick that day to basically either whitewash Columbus Day and call it Italian Cultural Day, or just eliminate it altogether in place of that day you now install Indigenous Peoples Day? It's petty, and it's awful. It's spiteful. And I can't get anyone to explain that to me. No politician is going to say that.
Yeah, right.
Because deep down inside their mind, and I know political minds have been involved in politics, they're going to do whatever they have to do to become, guess what, reelected. That's cool. I could deal with that.
Right.
I mean, those are the countervailing theories of pressure politics in terms of how things work.
Right. Well, so when you approach somebody like Mount Vernon, and then you also were involved recently in Pueblo, Colorado. You're a part of a mediation that's going out there because they have a statue out there in Pueblo, Colorado of Columbus, and that's been there since the early 1900s. And when you think of Pueblo, Colorado, of course you're going to think of the Wild West. You're going to think of the American Indians and the cowboys. What people overlook, though, is that was a big mining area. A lot of Italians went out there to mine, to help mine the silver and burn charcoal and other things. And so they stayed there, and they're a big part of that community. And that's been an ongoing dispute. And you've been involved in a mediation there. Well, how does it turn out when you approach people and you tell them the facts and you try to come up with some sort of common ground? What's the reaction? It probably is a mixed reaction in some places, but give us a scoop of what you found.
You're right, Truby. It is a mixed reaction. Mm-hmm. And so they fall into a number of different categories. Those people who actually read the material that I submit or listen to the people's arguments about our side of things, when I say our Italian Americans, they say, okay, tell me what's going on. Explain to me what your point is, and let me listen. And if they do a deep dive, even if it's not deep, if they do any type of dive, if they look at the facts, they'll start to question it. So, for example, with the board out there, I sent I sent a very similar letter to them, and I got some really wonderful responses. I actually bought, I don't know, about 20 or 30 of Rafael Ortiz's book, because he's written about 3 or 4 books
Yeah, he's great.
about Columbus, which basically debunked a lot of the theories or misinterpretations of Columbus being a rapist, a murderer, a colonizer, and so forth. And I sent it to them by mail. I said, here you go. This is for you. Read it. Uh, but but they were good. The mayor in particular, he stepped back and said, I'm not going to step on anyone's toes. He was the ultimate politician. He said, I'm going to hire at the city's expense a mediator. And he hired this mediator who grew up in Pueblo, Colorado, was a lawyer in California. He was Harvard Law, and he turned out to be fantastic. He listened to both sides. He tried to get the sides together. We had a couple of conferences, but it went south right away. It just went south. But the bottom line was that the numbers were on our side. They voted to allow it to remain. It's still there. They just had their celebration. They sent me some video clips of it. I'm still in touch with the folks out there. They're happy, but they have to remain vigilant.
Yes.
I have no problem with American Indians, with anybody saying, I think X, Y, and Z about Columbus, and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to demonstrate. That's your perfect right. I mean, with my legal training, what else would I say? Of course you have that right. I respect that right. Even if you're wrong, even if you're stupid, you have that right. And so please knock yourself out. No problem. But just do it respectfully. Do it with some honor and dignity. And then we can talk. I love hearing what other people have to say. I mean, going back, I would say about 15 years ago, I was puzzled about a Columbus Day celebration. I forget the city. It'll come to me. What's the Mile High city? Tell me.
Denver.
Okay, so Denver, I believe, was the site of the first Columbus Day parade.
Oh, okay.
I may be mistaken.
You might be right about that. Yeah, you might be right.
And for the same reasons you say, how is Denver populated with Italians? Because you said the mining and the railroad building. Who else is going to do it except the Italians who were brought here by the Padron system, which is a whole different conversation. But I was curious, why are they demonstrating the Columbus Day parade? So I read a couple of articles, and one name popped up all the time. And it was a professor from a local university. So I tried to reach out to him, and he wasn't returning my calls. I kept it up because, as my mother once said, you're the biggest pain in the ass I know. but it was a loving attribute because that's what I do. And
right.
Again,
sure.
I don't mean to be belligerent. I mean to be persistent.
Right.
And that's I like it. It's a trait that works, Truby.
All right.
So in this event, I did get a return phone call, and I just asked him the question: Tell me your issues with Columbus. And he said, Michael, I grew up in a family with a rich history from the American Indians. I forget what tribe it was, and I was always taught, and I learned that Columbus was the face of evil. He brought all of these terrible things to North America, and it was South America as well. And I said, well, did he do it himself? And he goes, no, I can't say that. That's ridiculous. He goes, he's the symbol of what happened next. And it's probably most well articulated in 2 books by Charles Mann. One is 1491, and the other book is 1493. And here I will admit, it took me a long time to read these books because they're so deep in history and research. But it said something. It screamed out to me that the idea that the American Indians or the indigenous people should have a day replacing Columbus Day was awkward because they're the same people we are. And that's why I said earlier, we're all the same. We each have foibles. We each have drawbacks. And so if you're going to call Columbus a colonizer, a rapist, a murderer,
yeah, right.
Look backward. And again, I don't mean to be belligerent in any way. I just mean to be factual. This was happening with the tribes in North America before Columbus arrived. How do you think they arrived there? I mean, if I love maps, so if you ever look at maps over the years and you see how Mesopotamia grew, and then it was drawn, or the Roman Empire. If
Right.
you look throughout the years, it started here and it grew, and then it was drawn.
Right.
Things change, and
Right.
that's called colonization. That's what we do. That's human nature. So the same thing happened with tribes. The larger tribes got larger until they withdrew because of sickness or other issues. It happened here, and there was cannibalism here before that. And there was wars and rapes, and it was no different. So
Right.
one is no better than the other. I was brought up to treat the person who sweeps the street in front of a large metropolitan building the
Mhm.
same way as the owner of that building.
Right.
Respect each other, because no one's better than anyone else. I've never had that attitude,
Right.
and it's really worked well for me. So when you say replace it with Indigenous Peoples Day, the problem is like getting the question when you're on the stand, how often have you struck your wife?
Mhm.
You say, no, I've never struck her. Now you're on the defensive. So I have to be on the defensive now and say,
Yeah.
oh, you're terrible people.
Right.
You shouldn't replace my day.
Mm.
And now I come across as being belligerent,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you want to make the argument, but you want to be respectful as well.
Right. Well, what do you see as besides Columbus? What other issues do you see that we have to face as the Italian American community? Anything else that really grapples you and things that think is important?
Well, yeah, a lot of people still don't understand that we were victimized. So I alluded to what was called the Padron system, which was just a form of contract employment between about 1880 and 1930, not just with Italians, but Greeks, African countries, China in particular, because there was a void after the Civil War. What happened to their workers on the plantation fields, the sugar crops? What happened to those people? They got better lives, right? Those former slaves moved north, and they started to work in the industries, make more money, and thankfully they did. But they weren't going to work those fields. But those fields had to be picked. Those fields had to be cultivated. So what happened? Well, the same thing. I'm going to use that word confluence again. There were problems in Italy. They were reunified, and because of that, there were taxes, and the farmers in Italy were suffering, and a lot of poverty happened. So they were looking for a way out, and there were people waving newspapers and ads in local Italian newspapers. Come to America. The roads paved with gold. And one immigrant is famous for saying, and I hope I get this right, I learned three things about that saying. One, the roads are not paved with gold. Two, the roads are not paved at all. And three, I didn't know, but I came here to pave the roads. So, yeah, it was basically a form of forced labor. So that's why Italians came to this country, and they benefited to some extent. But by and large, they were really taken advantage of. And there were so many voids out west to build a railroad, to mine the mines, the coal mines in the Appalachian areas, and of course down south, the crops, up north in Boston and New York and the industrial cities. We filled that gap. So we were victimized by the Padron system. People have to understand and grapple that. We were victimized during World War II. When we were part of what was called the enemy aliens, right? By the proclamation right after Pearl Harbor, and we joined the war. We were interned as peoples, and mostly the Japanese, but we were too. So were the Germans here in America. And the other thing about that, Truby, is that I understand that of all of the cultural waves of people in the United States at that time, the most number of ethnic groups who went to fight World War II were Italian Americans.
Yeah. That's a sad irony you bring up, because it was almost like their parents were either being interned or they had to report to the police departments or something like that, while their kids are going off fighting against Mussolini, fighting against Hitler, fighting against everybody. Yeah. And that's very.
I had my father and his four brothers were in the war. Thankfully, they all came back. I'm proud of that. They fought for America. But so that was the other one. So the lynchings are important to know. And it's not just the lynchings in New Orleans, Kirby. That was one segment. There were lynchings in other places, in Tulsa, well, I'm sorry, in Tallahassee, other parts of Florida, other parts of Louisiana, and of course, other lynchings that really didn't make the newspapers. But the question is, I don't like to just throw out facts. I like to say,
Right.
why?
Right.
Why were they lynched? And the best explanation is in one article that I understand was generated by my letter to the New York Times by saying, where's our apology because of what you wrote in your editorial following the lynching in New Orleans? Where's our apology about all of the other segments in your newspaper that lambasted Italians and specifically Sicilians? And I say that because the Sicilians in particular came here to New Orleans and down south by the hundreds of thousands. And they were treated as the blacks were treated. They were treated that way because they lived with the blacks. And in New Orleans, they lived in the French Quarters, which is a major place to go and visit today. But at that time, it was called Little Palermo. So they were treated like the blacks. They had darker skin. They were uneducated. They were treated and called all types of names. And so they were fair game in terms of lynching. I hate to even say that. It sounds awful. But again, in 1890, it was true. Mm-hmm. And so the New York Times was faced with a letter. If you want, I'll tell you a story about that letter.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So we had the apology done, and I'll get to Mayor Cantrell's embracing the idea. So the question is, people were saying, I never heard about the Times and what they wrote. Did you know the exact quote?
No, I mean, no, I don't.
The exact quote is horrible. It's horrible. I
was going to ask you about it.
I'm going to find it because this is an editorial, Truby, that was in the New York Times only a few days after the lynching. Forgive me for not having it in hand. I'll find it. Okay. Here's the editorial. This is word by word. I start with the quote.
This is from the New York Times, correct? And it's
New York Times. These sneaking and cowardly Sicilians, the descendants of bandits and assassins who have transported to this country the lawless passions, the cutthroat practices, are to us a pest without mitigations. Our own rattlesnakes are as good as citizens as they. Our own murderers are men of feeling and nobility compared to them. And the editors concluded that it would be difficult to, quote, find one individual who would confess that privately he deplores it very much, referring to the lynching.
And they don't want to apologize for this?
Well, that was the thing. So that 75-page, the letter itself is about 10 pages, but with the attachments is 75 pages. John Fratta, who was running the CSJ in New York at that time, asked me to pen a letter, and I did. And we went back and forth with the letter. We had this printed up. I think we made 30 copies, and we're carrying this box. And I called up and I had a conversation with one of their counsel for the New York Times. And she goes, "Oh, Michael, there's a way of dealing with that. You have to submit a letter to the editor, or you can email this to some general mailbox." I said, "No, that's not good enough."
Okay.
She goes, "Well, that's my recommendation." I said, "All right." So we came up with a letter. We made 30 copies. And in that letter, if you see on the front page, are 30 people we identified as being on the board, our trustees for the New York Times. And I delivered it, along with John Fratta, to their offices on 8th Avenue in New York City. And that council's secretary came down with a cart to take that box back upstairs. And I hoped would circulate that letter to everyone who now had earmarks on it for that certain individual. And I was waiting and waiting for some type of call, email, nothing. I read the New York Times every day looking for an apology. And then all of a sudden, an article pops up And the date of the article is right before Columbus Day that year, October 12th, 2018, written by award-winning author and writer Brent Staples. Have you heard of him?
I heard of him, yeah.
He's wonderful. I got that. I had some conversations with him, and the article is entitled "Vicious Bigotry, Reluctant Acceptance: An American Story: How Americans Became White." And the thrust of the article is that America was founded on the idea that it was going to be run by white men, landowners.
Right.
But with the influx of other people and so forth, things changed. But those people who came in later, truly, were treated with disrespect because of the color of their skin.
Right.
And the rule of thumb was that the darker the skin, the more disrespect that there was. They were treated in that fashion. And so America became white overnight with the lynchings because we got that respect because of the intervention of the Italian government. We got that respect because of the advent of Columbus Day. And we got that respect because people started to fight. But it didn't last long. Those articles, similar to what I read to you in that editorial, kept popping up in the New York Times. It didn't go away.
Right.
And the article went on to say, oh, by the way, the editors changed in 1930. And it did, by the way. And we're talking about what happened in the New York Times before 1930. So in a weird way, they didn't say apology. What they just said is that we're going to bring this up to the level of bringing it to public opinion and saying, we realize this happened. But was there an apology? No. Was there recognition that this harmed people? Because it did? No, it didn't happen. So I don't take this as a fair and reasonable reaction to our request for an apology. Not at all.
Not at all.
And the thing with the apology that we asked of Mayor Cantrell was, people would call up, the newspapers would call up before this all took place. Because, and I'm going to say this in an odd way, the idea that we were going to have an apology from the mayor of a major U.S. city about what happened there 128 years earlier kind of made things odd. Writers were calling up, said, what's this all about? It's 128 years ago. And they didn't say it that way, but the tone was simple to me. The tone was, what's the problem? It's over. Deal with it. Work it out. Suck it up. But their question was, Michael, Mr. Santo, how do you think that an apology about what happened 128 years ago has any significance? And I said, if you look at history, 128 years is not a long time. If you think about how, for example, American Indians pass on stories, they do it on an intergenerational basis. My grandfather was born in 1894 on my mother's side up in Albany. That means his parents were alive during the Civil War. That means he heard stories about the Civil War, yet he could tell me through secondhand experience stories that I can't find in newspapers. Yeah. He could tell me those stories. So 128 years later on was not a problem. Also, the idea that 128 years went by didn't change the fact that the descendants of the victims still lived in the New Orleans area. They're still there. And in fact, we had about a dozen or so descendants from those 11 victims show up at that apology presentation.
Right, yeah, I remember that, yeah.
And it was held at the American Italian, I don't know if it's a museum or American Italian Cultural Center, run by Frank Maselli, who was a terrific guy. Yeah. And he was instrumental in getting this done.
That's great.
And so also in attendance were the descendants of some of the people who were complicit. So who were complicit? I'm going to tell you. And I hate to say it. Starting with lawyers, politicians, at the local level, at the state level, business people, bankers. Why? Because it boils down to the age-old issue of money and control. They recognized that the Italians who became organized after they were brought here to work the fields And those people said, I worked the fields, I made some money, and I started to do things on my own. And some of the more clever Italians started to bring in things, namely fruit and other items, import, export. And they were making money. They became successful. And that was a threat to those people who were running that city.
Yeah, yeah.
And so what was the cause of these lynchings? To me, it was all about power and money. The fact that a very popular police commissioner was shot dead in the streets in front of his home was not the impetus. It was an excuse for charging 19 Sicilian immigrants with murder, conspiracy. It's just implausible. But even before they were charged, hundreds of Italian Americans were rounded up by the police commissioner who succeeded the man who was killed. But 19 were brought to justice, as they say, and it was going to be in 2 trials. The first trial involved 9. 6 were exonerated, found not guilty. The other 3 had their cases dismissed. Yet, those same 9 you would expect in today's court system would walk out the door, maybe even run out the door after that finding, right? But that didn't happen. They were sent back to the prison where they were being held, the Orleans prison, which no longer exists, was knocked down. They were sent back for other charges that the judge declared. So this case was rammed through the so-called justice system, which was rigged because the judges were complicit too. There's no question about it. And I'll tell you who's doing a deep dive on that. There's an author down in New Orleans who's a former FBI agent, former federal prosecutor, and he's writing a book about this. The only book before that was written by Professor Gambino out of the CUNY system here in New York City. And his book was entitled Vengeance. And that became the subject of a movie that came out in 1999. The movie was awful. The book was terrific. Right. It didn't gain enough traction. Right. But, things came to light and moved forward. So those points about how we were treated didn't really go away. Sacco and Vanzetti is another example of how things were ramped through the so-called justice system.
Right.
And the best book on that was written by Supreme Court, the fellow who later became a Supreme Court justice. I forget his name offhand. But his book was written in 1927. So he read through all of the transcripts, and he basically came to the conclusion that this was a completely unjustified. The evidence simply was not there. And these 2 basically were hanged. I believe they were hanged. But that's another example. But it keeps on going. And so what about Hollywood? My point is, what hurts more? A Hollywood movie that goes on and on and on from 1975 until now, and being declared one of the best movies ever, The Godfather, which is based loosely on a true account of some of the mob families in New York City, or a trial like Sacco and Vanzetti, where people were actually died as a result of the injustice. I just don't know. Yeah. I just don't know. But when you put it all together, it smells and stinks, and we have to address it. Yeah. All we want is a fair shot at being American Italians or Italian Americans. It doesn't make a difference to me. I'm American first. I always tell people that. And I'm watered down. Right? My children are more watered down than I am. And I believe in America, but I love my culture and my background and my family.
Where's your family from? In Italy, from Sicily originally, or?
My grandmother's family's from Sicily. My grandfather's from out a farming community outside of Naples. So between those 2, I guess that's what.
Very Southern Italian, yeah.
Yeah, that's what turned me on. And the other idea was that the Northern Italians treated the Southern Italians with disrespect.
Oh, yeah.
They had a lot of that going on. The sociological dynamics are fascinating and sad at the same time.
Yeah,
it really is.
There's a famous African American writer who visited Italy back then. He said that the Negroes of the South, he said, had it better than the Italians of the South. I forget the author. It just escapes my mind at the moment. But he had visited and he made that observation. So Yeah, we're very poor. We had a lot of needs.
So there's one word I want to bring up: um, colonizer. Right? Columbus was a colonizer. All right, maybe not Columbus. He sailed the ships here. He did a brave thing. There's no question about it. He missed India by a few miles, so he wasn't all that brilliant of a salesman. But
Right.
the word colonizer is odd. And when I talked about the maps before, I talked about colonization.
Right.
Well, if it wasn't Columbus sailing on behalf of Spain, it would be someone else, by the way.
Sure, of course.
So take for example the first black to play baseball, Jackie Robinson.
Right.
Who was second? People don't know who was second. People don't care who was second. It was Larry Doby, who played for the Cleveland Indians. Mm-hmm. Only a few months later. So people hold up Charles Lindbergh as being a brave pilot. Well, guess what? If he didn't do it, there was someone right behind him, breathing down his neck, and I think they were Frenchmen, ready to go. They were all set. They were better financed and ready. They had better planes, and they would have made it too, by the way, in my view. But Charles Lindbergh did it first. So what I'm saying is that, okay, Columbus made it first. He's the face. Lindbergh's the face. Jackie Robinson's the face. But they're the face of things that change, good or bad, however you want to account for it. But being a colonizer is not a bad thing. It's what we are, right? And you can colonize in a nice way, but we just seem to colonize in other ways. Yeah. We hit people over the head with clubs or shoot or bomb people. But that doesn't change. You guess how many territories the United States has around the world? Right? So we're not innocent here.
No,
and anyone who claims we are just hasn't opened their eyes to it. Right. So, move in with open eyes. That's the only way to deal with it.
We all have our flaws, that's for sure.
Yeah.
We'll have to recognize that.
So moving forward, I'm sorry, you asked the question that's hanging on my head. I have to apologize for going around so much. Moving forward, what do we do? I think continue with some successful points. Remain organized, right? Get people excited. We need money. We have to be funded in order to take out ads, in order to have organizations. Get recognized. And so only a few days ago, the First Lady invited a contingency of Italian American leaders to Washington, and she gave a very nice speech.
There, yeah.
And in her speech, I think in the third paragraph, she talked about the lynchings, which to me was, I said, wow, you would never have heard that before.
No.
So it came up.
Yeah.
But we were also recognized by the Trump administration because he recognized Columbus Day. The Biden administration recognized Columbus Day. We wouldn't have that except for the work that we did. What else should we do? Positive imaging. Insist that we get positive imaging in the school books, in the curriculums, and on TV, on the History Channel. Continue on with the Italian American language. Right? The Italian language has been criticized in place of Chinese, and I have no problem with that. Each community can decide on their own, but we should maintain that sense of culture and continuation of moving forward that way. Other positive things that have happened is that we've had certain authors come out and say, let's address something here. And if it's not Ortiz, who's not the traditional type of author, by the way, he is a, what can I say? He's like a Monday morning quarterback, right? He is an historian because of the way he's approached it. But some of the collegiate authors, like Mary Graber and others, have started writing books about Columbus in a more positive fashion. Another thing that I propose to a certain number of groups is we really need an international study about Columbus. Now, this sounds odd. It sounds really strange.
Yeah.
Because someone could say, wait, you haven't learned about Columbus after 400 or 500 years? And you know what the answer is? No. Because a lot of his writings are still in the archives that have yet to be discovered or reviewed in that type of context. There has to be a discussion at a level where people can understand that professors are getting together, historians are getting together, and quabble, go back and forth, have discussions, have disagreements, but do it at a level where we can have the conversation, and it's on a different platform, instead of saying, do away with Columbus Day, do away with that statue, knock it down. It's so spiteful. Knock down that statue. Where do you go with that statue?
Yeah.
Well, but the statue that was knocked down in New Jersey, in Newark, New Jersey, wound up face down in a parking lot.
Yeah. Awful.
Right? But thankfully, and I believe this took place, some Italian American organizers decided, hey, we'll buy that statue from you and we'll put it up in a place where it will be recognized and treasured.
Yeah.
I can get into the legal aspects of the statues and why cities are empowered and have all the complete authority to knock them down. Those that are not knocked down are there only because of contractual issues when they were erected, and dedications that the cities made.
Right.
So those lawsuits that are positive and wound up having the statues still there, like in Philadelphia, like in Syracuse, in Pueblo, Colorado, is because those statues were either protected or erected there with the understanding from the city in writing that it's going to be there ad infinitum.
What about moving some of these states? So, like back, a few years back, of course, they were tearing down Confederate statues, and a lot of the southern states passed legislation to protect anything that was like over 50 years old that was erected 50 years ago, whatever. Any ideas about that? That maybe I don't know if that would work. I don't know if you could get something like that passed in New York State, but maybe in Colorado or elsewhere might be more open to that, where they would pass a law protecting all these landmarks and relics and other things.
Well, I go back to that home rule concept in law. Each state it can do what they want. I don't see a federal law being enacted about that, and I don't think one should be, frankly. I really don't.
Right.
I think states should be independent. We're a republic. We're not a democracy. Right. We're a constitutional republic, and the tenet of that is that each state has the authority to promulgate laws along those lines, and I respect that 100%.
Right.
So I may disagree with it, but I throw my hands up and say, okay, you've got the power today. And that's part of my letter. In it, I write, you're the politician of today, not tomorrow. You're there for 2 or 4 year term. What gives you the right to make such a permanent decision about taking down a statue or a day when you may not be around in a couple of years? And if you're going to do that, at least have the respect to do it with some degree of intelligence and listen to our audience.
Right. What are you working on now? Anything you have that's most pressing that you're trying to get done?
We're always fighting that fight with the statues, and that really rests on local lawyers who volunteer or who get paid to bring on an action to either have the statue removed or protected, and that's not going to change. But the great thing about this is that there are a good number of local Italian American organizations doing just that. I'd like to think that I've helped them with some of the points that they should look at. I'm not going to go through that. It's boring, but there are some points that they have to look at in order to decide if there's a worthwhile proposition on that. I've been asked to lecture on a few points through the Italian Charities of America, which is a local group in one of the boroughs of New York City. And they're a charitable organization, but they're also an educational one. So they've had a lot of lectures over the years about different topics. So I was asked to talk about the lynchings in New Orleans. And I was also asked to talk about the Padron system. And then they took so much advantage of me by asking me to do something else. I came up with Sacco and Vanzetti. So I have 4 books on my shelf to look at. And come up with something that I think can hold the attention of someone for 40 minutes.
That's great. Well, then, so people can know that you're a lawyer. You've been a lawyer for how many years now? What, over more than 30 years, right?
Yeah, it's about 40 years.
You specialize in malpractice suits, and I think also.
Yeah, I handle general personal injury and medical malpractice claims. And, I know all the jokes, and I'm cool with that. It's all right. I frankly don't like most lawyers. I think a lot of them are pompous. When I went to law school, I was probably one of the poorest kids there. And that kind of upset me. I was intimidated by that, frankly. I got over it. It gave me more strength. I've always told people, I think that when you're faced with that type of opposition in life, not having money, it makes one stronger if your mental approach is in line with how you move forward with your philosophy and your approach to life. And by fighting, you become stronger. But again, it's a delicate balance of not being. I could use a curse word that would send a better message without being stupid or without being ignorant or coming across as being crude. Use it. I like to think that I'm using my talent and my education in a polite, gentle manner, but at the same time being a strong advocate for people I represent, not just in my practice, but in the Italian American community.
Well, we got a lot of battles ahead of us. That's for sure. We're going to need you. And we need
I look forward to it. I look forward to it. I've met a lot of good people. I have to say that it's been a great experience because of that. It's been frustrating because of that. But, if you don't fight the good fight, then what's the point? I think Martin Luther King said, you're really, truly judged when there's opposition in your life. When things are going along smooth and you go along with it, judging you at that point is of no consequence. It's what you do when the chips are down.
Right.
He said it in a more elegant fashion, but I just explained it. So I like to think that because of the fight, this grit that I like to think I possess and I demonstrate is there because of that fight and because of not having things just handed to me. And part of today's problems, I think, with a lot of the cancel culture crowd is, and I'm not trying to make excuses for them, I'm just trying to be factual, is that so many things were handed to them. And so many things were easy for them. I mean, I'm sure your parents and your grandparents like mine, they were in tough times. But, tough times create good things. Good things create tough times. It's a cyclical thing on a societal level. It's really tough to get around. I mean, I have 3 daughters. I didn't want them to go to school and come out owing hundreds of thousands of dollars. My father couldn't. My father's best option for me was to join the union to drive a truck. But I said I couldn't do that. And he goes, "Well, I can't help you with tuition." I said, "It's okay. It's all right." I got a job in town. I did all kinds of jobs. I worked as an electrician. I learned the butcher trade. I laid cement. The point was that I paid for every dollar of my undergraduate, graduate, and legal education. I'm proud of it. And I've been very fortunate. My wife and I have been very fortunate to have been able to pay for our children's education. But I didn't give it to them. They earned it. And we paid their 4-year degree, but they were responsible to move forward, to go forward and pay their own degrees on a master's level or at a professional level. And, they have to have some skin in the game.
That's right.
They have to learn that life is not that easy.
Right.
But I try to develop a balance. And I have the same way and the same approach with everything I do, including fighting on behalf of our community.
Right. Well, that's the way to do it. Well, I would have to talk to you again, Michael, because we got a lot of stuff going on. We want to get, a lot of things we need to get done in the Italian American community. And, you're at the forefront of it. If we get another success like you did for us in New Orleans, we'll be in really good shape.
Well, we have some good people. So I'm very confident.
Yeah, that's right.
I thank you for your time. I hope that whoever listens to this gains some knowledge and maybe gets up on Google and starts looking at other things to become educated.
I'll include links to your law firm, of course, and if you want, I can put your email there as well. People can get in touch with you. A lot of people need a lot of help. I talk to a lot of people all over the country, and people are facing these kinds of problems increasingly, and they need a lot of help with a lot of people because they're just common folks, and they just don't know how to approach this. And you guys have the experience. And so, hopefully we can network people around the country to help each other out.
That's okay. I mean, feel free to put my email address out there. I will respond to everyone. I give my time up for these things, and I get a great deal of satisfaction out of it. That's how I get paid, by the way. I smile at you. I do. Truly. I mean, I've been doing pro bono work all my life as a lawyer, giving back to the community, and this is one way of doing it as well. So I'm happy to do that.
That's great. That's wonderful. Well, Michael, thank you very much for joining me today. And I'll have an introduction, of course, for everything, and we'll get this up and going right away. And I want to thank you.
I appreciate it.
Well, you're doing a great job.
Very well.
So much.
Bye-bye.
Awesome.